Okay, so Sanjay asked me to talk about the impact of computers that builds on this microelectronics. I don't have to tell you about Moore's Law. That's already been done. Gordon Moore, in 1975, when he replotted the number of transistors on the chip, he discovered that the potential was going to be doubling the number of transistors every couple of years. That has since slackened off. Now it's every 2 or 3 years, maybe every 3 years that we're doubling the number of transistors on the chip. People have suggested the death of silicon. It turns out that the number of transistors on the chip is a function of two things. One is the shrinking size of the transistor. The other is the increasing size of the chip. So the doubling is you make smaller transistors, you make a bigger chip, you've got twice as many transistors 3 years out. It turns out that we now have in the research labs this 3D effect, which means multiple layers of silicon, which effectively gives you a much larger chip. So I'm not suggesting that nanotechnology is not the wave of the future. I am suggesting that we still have a fair amount of headroom for at least another 10 years and maybe more. We will see 50 billion transistors on a chip before much longer. The people who organized this thing asked me to stick to the same format of innovation, societal impact, opportunities, and barriers. Before I do that, I've got to give you my first slide, which focuses people on where computer fits in. You see at the bottom the electrons. That's the stuff that Banerjee and his colleagues produce more and more transistors on the chip. You see at the top problems. Those are the applications that we want to run. As been mentioned already, in 1971 to 74 was the birth of the microprocessor. We had 2,300 transistors on a chip. We're running at 100 kilohertz. Today, we've got 3 to 5 billion transistors on a chip, and we're running in the gigahertz range. So we've got far more transistors on a chip, and we're running at far more orders of magnitude faster, which gives us an enormous improvement on just what we can do. The applications that we can run now, nobody ever even hinted that that might be possible back in 1971 or even 10 years ago. The problems to electrons. So if I could, what it would be really great is to walk up to the electrons that are sitting there on the chip and go, electrons, solve this problem. And if I spoke electrons and the electrons spoke English, there'd be no problem. Unfortunately, I can't speak electron. They can't speak English, and so I am reduced to not having a global optimum from the statement of the problem in natural language, like English or French or German or Chinese or whatever, to the electrons finding the moving according to the potential difference that the electricity provides. Rather, what I have to do is transform that natural language problem into an algorithm, get rid of the ugliness of natural language, like ambiguity, for example, from there to a mechanical language. And there are thousands of mechanical languages, C, C++, in the old days, Fortran, COBOL. Some people would argue Java, although I'm one who believes Java is more a religion than a language, and on and on. From there, we have a compiler to translate that program from mechanical language into the interface that differentiates the x86 from Intel from the PowerPC of Freescale, for example. And then from below that, the microarchitecture, like the stuff that's underneath the hood of your car that makes everything work so that when you push on the gas, the right thing happens. When you push on the brake, a very different right thing happens. And you sitting in the car at the interface with the car, you don't see what's going on underneath the hood. But what's going on underneath the hood is very, very important. In fact, there's the engineering trade-offs of how much benefit and how much cost that you're going to get. Below that, the circuits that actually implement the structures. Sanjay mentioned my branch predictor. That's built out of circuits that implement that structure, which provides a huge performance benefit. And from those circuits, we have the electrons, which is a technology that Professor Banerjee develops. So at each layer of this transformation hierarchy, there are people in the computer industry that are working at their layer to improve their part of this whole transformation structure so that applications of bigger and bigger import can be done as a result of having more and more transistors on the chip. With that introduction, we get into innovation. And I've listed several of them. Other people, in fact, the speakers before me have brought up some others. I could fill, I don't know, the state of Texas, I could fill a half a dozen transparencies. It was mentioned Harvey Cragen's programmable DSP. I like to think of Harvey Cragen's Texas Instruments Advanced Scientific Computer. A very different programmable DSP, small, advanced scientific computer, huge, working on huge scientific problems. The first microprocessor that actually made a difference from taking the microprocessor from the toy market to the actual serious business market was a 16-bit microprocessor that came out of Intel and Motorola and Xilinx in 1979. And the best design of all of them, it hasn't prevailed for economic reasons, but the best design came from Nick Tredenick, who was a Ph.D. graduate from the University of Texas at Austin at Motorola, called the Motorola 68000. That was done right here in Austin. John Koch, one of the giants in computer technology, moved from IBM research in Watson to IBM here in Austin to do the RS 6000. RISC System 6000, which was a RISC system done correctly. John won the Turing Award for that work. AMD and Intel have been piggybacking enhancements forever. The cell processor, arguably the best microprocessor for handling games, done out of IBM by Peter Hofstee. Several people at UT, I must embarrassingly admit that I've pulled a few of my students, Rob Chappelle, who showed that simultaneous multi-threading can be enhanced with subordinate micro-threading. I don't have time to get into the detail here at the University of Texas. In 2004, Ona Mutlu came up with run-ahead execution. He graduated, is now an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon. And Atta Suleiman, my most recent PhD, who's now working for Intel in town, his thesis was the first one to show that heterogeneous chips, that is microprocessors that have different flavors of general purpose cores on the same chip is a win. Now the industry is getting on the bandwagon, but back when we first proposed this 4 or 5 years ago, we felt like the Lone Ranger. I mentioned UT Fast. Professor Derek Chu, one of our young faculty at the University of Texas, has come up with a simulation technique. Simulation is the way we do experimentation in computer design. And what he's come up with is a mechanism to get 5 orders of magnitude improvement in how fast we can simulate. That's thinking of your microscope, those of you in the medical field, that can get resolution 500,000 times better than what you can do today. And what he's come up with is going to revolutionize our ability to simulate. So these are some of the innovations. The societal impact is that with these new chips, harnessing the technology that Professor Banerjee produces, we can do in an hour what used to take a year. And the possibilities are enormous. Curing cancer. You know, one of the things, in fact, I'm not going to list them because I'm long since running out of time, but one of the things I look forward to is a day when the Nobel Prize winner gets up there and he says, the reason I was able to come up with what I came up with was because of the faster computer and the more powerful computer that I had available to me. I think there's no question that we're already making huge impact. Somebody mentioned healthcare. I think curing cancer, that's the one that I like to see downstream. It would be nice if we could use computers to enhance creativity, remove tedium. I remember a long time ago seeing a program to design a house by computer, and with the capability of letting everybody have the house of his choice. You want 3 bedrooms, you want 4 bedrooms, you want 2 bathrooms, you want 10 bathrooms, you want a 5-car garage, whatever. Computers enable creativity. And instead, what did they use the computer for? To stamp out the houses like cookie cutters. So misguided, but the future's there if we wish to embrace it. What are the opportunities? I've already said it. We will have, in a few years, 50 billion transistors on a chip. The single processor, single computer microprocessor has already given way to multiple cores, multiple processors on the chip. So you've heard of Core Duo, Quad Core, Intel's Larrabee project here in town, which has now gotten a new name, Sandy Bridge, 32 processors on the chip. We will have 1,000 processors on the chip, enabling us to do far more than we can do right now. The problem is, and this gets back to the title of this thing that we're doing here today, is end of the beginning, a beginning of the end. Clearly, it's not the beginning of the end. Clearly, with all this stuff on the core, we've hit against roadblocks that are, at first blush, seem insurmountable. Bandwidth. To get the stuff off the chip and on the chip, there aren't enough pins on the chip to be able to do that. Maybe we need to build a chip instead of on a wafer, make it in a sphere to get larger surface area to get those pins in there. Bandwidth is a problem. Energy, power consumption, that's a problem. To keep going the way we've been going for the last 40 years requires a big game changer. And I would argue that game changer is education. The first slide I showed you problems and electrons. I showed you the various layers. And up to now, people have been okay working at their own layer, ignoring the other layers. I'm an algorithm person. I don't have to worry about the circuits or even the architecture. Or I'm a circuits person. I don't have to worry about what the computer is being used for. I submit that moving forward, the only way we're going to move forward and be successful is if we break those layers and we start educating students that can bridge those layers. And that takes me to the last slide, barriers. And I think the operative word on barriers, as far as I'm concerned, and in fact it's been hinted at by the other speakers, is to be competitive. It's already been mentioned. In fact, you mentioned these 2 other states, Massachusetts and California, that seem to have something to do with our computer industry. Yeah, and the schools in Massachusetts, the school in Massachusetts is called MIT, and the schools in California, among others, are called Berkeley and Stanford. And they understand this competitive thing. If we're going to compete for the best and the brightest, then and produce graduates that can take their role and move this thing forward, then there are a lot of things that we have to do differently. And a lot of people in this room that can influence the legislature, I would suggest that you do so. First of all, a teaching assistant budget that recognizes that what we teach in the classroom is important, and it doesn't get taught without adequate TA support. Second of all, fellowship support so we can attract the best students. A package where industry and academia get together so that industry contributes the money that we can provide a fellowship to bring the student to Texas, and then the student can spend the summers in that company and get on-the-job experience, come back to the university in the fall. And we get 2 basis vectors. One basis vector, what he learns in the company, the other basis vector, what he learns in the university, and we produce a graduate that can be more effective in moving us forward and competing with Massachusetts and California, not to mention the rest of the world, which comments made about the rest of the world is absolutely right. We are losing to China and India. In fact, one comment was made that the people coming are now going back. A lot of them are not even coming. With the internet, they're finding that they can grow their own there. So we are in trouble unless we invest much more heavily in education. I'd like to encourage, in fact, I don't know how you're going to be able to do this, but encourage senior faculty to teach freshmen. In addition to my advanced graduate course, I also teach the freshman course. 400 freshmen in the classroom every other fall. Senior faculty that have the broader expertise teaching the undergraduates. I think it's critical. I wish we would reevaluate the difference between research, which generates a number of papers, most of which ought to be put into a write-only memory so nobody has to ever read it. And you're telling me I ought to shut up. Okay, I will in a moment. And scholarship, which is really important so that what we teach in the classroom is meaningful. Avoid the hype. Lately, there's all this, you know, sexiness associated with interdisciplinary, you know, biomathematics, which is often bad biology and worse mathematics. I would suggest that we invest more in the core disciplines. Biomathematics is good when the biologist is a strong biologist and the mathematician is a strong mathematician, and then they work together. And finally, lest I ignore them, K-12 education. What we're turning out of the high schools, and I see them in the freshman year, is horrible. Why? Because they're rewarded for their ability to memorize. And memorizing is not learning. In fact, my first quiz, I tell them ahead of time. I say, in class, I've taught you how to get from A to B. And in class, I've taught you how to get from B to C. On the exam, I'm going to ask you how to get from A to C. And if they've memorized, they'll fall flat. So that's my agenda that I wish you would take to the legislature, et cetera, and do something about preparing us to be able to compete. That's the biggest barrier, in my view. Thank you.